Okay, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Joe, he's Nick, and this is segment number 4 from this week's podcast or this week's show. If you're listening live, great. If you are listening to us on the podcast, you might want to catch our previous segments, parts 1 through 3, episode 126. Gosh, Nick, I know I said it earlier in the broadcast tonight, but time is just flying when you think about it. That's actually more than 2 years that we've been doing this.
You're right. It doesn't feel like it's been that long. Maybe it doesn't sound like it's been that long, but we have come a long way. I remember our first...
From that little table in my basement.
Yeah,
then moving up to my den and then moving to your basement.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I know.
We have come a long way now.
We actually have a broadcast center.
We do, and it's a real broadcast center.
Broadcast center. We
can do audio. We can
studio.
Do video. We can do vadio. Whatever the heck that is. Anyway, one of the things I think we probably worth spending some more time on is as much as we don't like talking about COVID.
Right, because we were just talking about it in the last segment. So
right. And
let's get it out of our system.
That's right. Because
no pun intended.
It's like not talking about breathing. Sooner or later you have to do it.
Yeah, no.
Anyway, there is an element to this that I really think is being overlooked, and it's a very dangerous one, and that is where the resources that are required to look after people with non-COVID illnesses, the different cancers, the different maladies that affect millions of people, not only in this province but in this country, have been diverted, and around the world have been diverted to fighting this, air quotes, dread disease. When you think about things like leukemia, when you think about kidney disease, dialysis, the money that would normally go to fund that, because we're pouring so much money into COVID, that money's got to come from somewhere. And every branch of medicine that I know of is always screaming for more money. If we just had a little more, we could do so much. And I'm not saying they're wrong, but I'm saying that, as a friend of ours was saying earlier this morning, there's a balancing act here that the premier or the prime minister has to consider everything in a much larger picture. And he's not. He's just looking at COVID. Say, how do we deal with COVID? Well, what about people, who suffer from PTSD or mental health disorders? Or, what about people who have bone cancer? The different cancers that are out there. What's going on with the research for them? What about nuclear medicine? All of these things are very cash intensive. So if we're taking money out of the healthcare system to put into this one envelope, then it's got to have consequences someplace else.
Well, I don't know that money. First of all, no, I was just going to say I don't know if money's the problem. Of course, money is a problem here. I mean, we're talking now a national debt in the $1 trillion range.
That's right.
That is
staggering,
really borderline unmanageable for a country like Canada with our small population. So money is a problem. But when it comes to rationing of healthcare services as a consequence of this particular event, the COVID-19 event, I don't think that money is really the problem, because what we've done is we've basically borrowed a whole pile of money and thrown it, or we've allocated a whole bunch of money. In this case, Nick, we actually haven't robbed from Peter to pay Paul.
How do you figure that?
Because we're still putting money into all of the other stuff, and then we're going out and borrowing more money and then putting it into the response for COVID. The real problem, I think, from a healthcare perspective, has been the number of procedures and normal medical services that have been either stopped, cold turkey, or delayed as a consequence of this. For instance, closing operating rooms because we don't want to have surgeons and nurses and doctors and patients coming into a hospital and getting infected.
Right.
So or just regular doctor's visits. I have a few medical conditions that I see doctors regularly for, and since this started, I have not been able to see a doctor in person. So there have been a few times where I've had to talk to the doctor on phone, a telephone consultation.
Right.
And they've done some stuff with medication. I recently had a conversation with one doctor who said we talked about blood pressure as a result of some of the things they were doing with medication. And you know what his response was? His response was, your blood pressure could go up as a result of this medication. So once you start taking this medication, go to Shoppers Drug Mart a couple of times a week and check your blood pressure.
What?
Because they have the blood pressure.
Yeah,
there,
I get
right?
that. Yeah.
And if it's at a certain level, stop using the medication and contact us.
You're kidding.
Okay, and now I don't mind doing that, but I can't help but point out, okay, guys, I'm paying for a service here.
A lot of money.
I don't see my taxes going down, and I'm not necessarily even asking for my taxes to go down, but can we? There's a reality check here, I think, that has to be considered. Certain realities that I'm not sure are being fully considered. So it's not just when we talk about the economy, and we talk about people who are, getting their paycheck week in and week out because they work for the government, and they're getting all of their benefits. And if you worked for the government for a period of time, but you're now retired, you're getting your pension. So the effect on the economy, it doesn't really have an effect on these people. They're not going to lose their jobs. They're not going to lose their pensions. Okay, they're okay. They're taken care of. It's the people like you and I who are out there trying to scratch out a living in the private sector that are going to be affected economically. So there's the economic problem, but there's also there's a very real medical problem. And I've heard people say, how many people have, maybe I shouldn't use the word epidemic, but there's been an uptick in suicides, depression, domestic violence. I've read since these, the government imposed restrictions and et cetera. I don't know how true all of that stuff is. I haven't really looked at the numbers
makes sense.
myself, but anecdotally, you're right. It does make sense.
I mean, think about this. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt.
You don't mean to, but you're going to?
That's right.
That's okay. I yield my time to the gentleman from Killaloe, Ontario.
I love that about the American Congress. Whenever they're having one of their panels. Now, we did all that, and I had a point.
Nick had a point.
And yes, okay.
Okay.
So you've got a culture that's wrapped around getting ahead, business, your job. You leave home, you go to work, you put your 40 hours in, you come home, right? All of a sudden, it gets turned on its head. You can't go to work. There's no place to go. You live with your wife and your 2 kids on the 15th floor of an apartment building in downtown Toronto. All the parks are closed. The schools are closed.
Well, my blood pressure is going up just thinking about living on a 15th floor, regardless of wife and kids, in downtown Toronto.
That may be an issue for some folks. I'm thinking you put them in a bungalow. You put them and you say you cannot go outside. You cannot recreate. You cannot go shopping. You cannot, we're going to bring your food to you. It's like being in prison because there's no escape. A friend of mine and I were having a conversation about why guys need to have some time, not every day and certainly not all day, but they need every once in a while just to be able to let their hair down and be guys and talk like guys without worrying about every word they say. Well, the same thing is true for husbands and wives and kids. Everybody needs a little room once in a while, and they weren't allowed that. So is it that surprising then that cases of mental stress, PTSD, you name it, were on the rise?
Violence.
domestic violence,
Right.
suicides, because people did not have the skills to cope with that. Not everybody gets to live in a submarine that goes to sea for 6 or 7 months a year and learn how to get along with 49 of their best friends. Okay, that doesn't happen. That's not the experience most of us have. We're used to being able to go out and breathe clean air, walk around outside, that kind of stuff, without a mask on. We're not allowed to. All of a sudden, all that was taken away, and that's why I think there was a large spike in a lot of the different maladies that we saw. It wasn't that the disease was killing us. It was the protecting us. It was like having parents that were so overprotective they smothered their children. And that's very much what this feels like.
The cure being worse than the disease.
Exactly.
Well, I don't know how bad it was, but anecdotally, as I said earlier, it seems to me to make a lot of sense that there's been an increase in these problems. But look, I keep on saying this. I'm not an enemy of wearing masks. Okay, personally, I don't like it. I think that its use I think it's effective, but I think that you shouldn't exaggerate the need for everybody to wear masks to attain some effectiveness. I'm very troubled by this, almost like a cultural sort of shift that we've got going on, where people are so deathly afraid of anything that they're going to. I was in the shopping center a few weeks ago with my grandchildren, 2 of our grandchildren, the boys, and boys being boys, they're wearing their masks. They're rambunctious, how kids can be, so they're horsing around a little bit. They're running around the basket a bit, and we were waiting in line to go to the checkout, and the woman in front of me, who was also wearing a mask, turned and she basically scolded me for not controlling the children, and not because they were being wild, but because they were invading her 2-meter space. Okay, and so I said, really, you're wearing a mask, they're wearing masks, and they're not touching you, they're not breathing on you, and they're not really coming close to you. They just happen to be encroaching in that 2 meters. But that wasn't good enough for her. So she lectured me, this is a teaching moment, and I just sort of shrugged my shoulders and said, yeah, fine, whatever. I could have been a lot worse. Like you could have been a lot worse. Nick, if you had been there,
I would have said, you're right, it is.
Exciting.
And as a matter of fact,
you would have gone over and coughed on her.
No. I would have just invited my grandchildren close and said, see that lady over there? She's terrified. Please never be that scared. There's nothing in life that can happen to you that would cause you to be that afraid, unless we're at war and you're marching into a room where they tell you you're going to have a shower. Other than that, I wouldn't be that dramatic, but just
understand.
Just, this is nothing to be afraid of. Don't be like her would be the teaching lesson.
Right. This is a teaching moment, children.
That's right. Don't
learning moment.
Be not afraid.
Have you ever heard that term before? This is a teaching moment.
No, it's another one of those new buzz phrases that pops up. There's a whole show we could do just talking about different buzz phrases and how the only one that seems to have ever lasted was cool.
Cool.
Like, when's the last time you ever heard somebody say, "Hey, man, that's groovy"?
I don't think I've heard that for a long time.
It's been ages, years, decades. But cool, that's been around for decades.
Yeah. I don't know when the first... I don't know. I was going to say the first time I heard it, but I don't know when the first time that came into common usage would be. Around what time?
Probably in the 60s.
You think so?
Yeah, probably.
I don't know.
I can't imagine the 50s generation